Well, I am rather busy.
Now he's going to move like right along to McGregor. That's his whole life, you know.
So Ghost in the Machine is obviously a very dated episode of the X-Files, and it's also perhaps not very good, but I do think that it was prescient in a strange way.
Well, I liked it. I do get the sense that there's a hokiness to it, and Ice is not hokey at all. I think it's very interesting how tonally different these episodes are, and how even the episodes we've seen already, this is doing a lot of different types of shows. This, again, we've been, in terms of the recording we've been doing lately, so we've done Firefly, United States of Terra, Deep Space Nine, dealing with a lot of stuff that's a little less episodic than this, and now we're going into, it's not quite anthology in the way that original series or even Next Generation went, but this is more episode by episode, which gives them the opportunity to tell different types of stories.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting too. Just this is really a side point, but Deep Space Nine and the X-Files premiered in the same year, 1993.
Yeah, and both are known for the way that they treated their myth arc is in the terms of the X-Files. Having finished DS9 by this point, it's going to be interesting to make some comparisons as this show goes on.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
I almost get part of a sense that maybe they even knew there was a certain amount of hokiness in the script at the time, but in a way it doesn't matter because I did like it as an episode.
Yeah, I mean it's very much grounded in a very different time and place. The character of, what is his name?
Brad
Wilczek.
I only know that because I wrote Brad White as in part of my notes, but
yeah, and part of my problem with this episode is that everybody is made out to be a little stupider than they actually are. For example, you don't really need voice recognition software to figure out that the voice of the computer is the same guy as Brad Wilczek, because it's like, come on. But yeah, I think that, obviously Brad Wilczek is Uresco is supposed to be like sort of an Apple type of company.
Yeah.
Brad Wilczek is sort of like a cross between Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak.
And a little Bill Gates in there too. Probably just the general 80s hacker, who made it huge.
But yeah, exactly. But I think that what is so interesting about the datedness of the episode is the attitude towards tech billionaires is very different and very 90s.
Yeah.
We forget exactly. Certainly technology was big business then, but it wasn't like it is now. And
it wasn't like it would have even been about 5 years after this episode premiered. I would say,
I don't know about that. I think maybe more like 10 or 15 years.
Well, I guess I'm thinking about how like the internet bubble was around, in 88, 99. So that was still a couple years from the world, because the World Wide Web didn't exist at the point this episode aired.
Well, I think that,
95.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So in other words, certainly again,
No, the web existed before 1995.
The internet existed before 19...
I used the web before 1995. Well, Richard just looked it up, and it was actually 1989. So
something happened in 95 or 76. I don't know. Anyway,
it doesn't really matter. But I see your point, but I think that what it really comes down to is that technology was really viewed as a cyclical kind of almost bubble business before this. Apple famously had this huge boom and bust. Personal computer companies in general had really, really famous boom and bust cycles. And that doesn't really happen anymore. Google became a giant company and is still a giant company 20 years later. Facebook became a giant company and is still a giant company. The lock-in that they have been able to create and I really think is self-sustaining to a large degree. This episode looks at technology as it's interesting because it looks at technology both as a curiosity and as an integral part of human existence. The whole thing about the smart house that is the basis for the central operating system. And incidentally, I don't necessarily think that the board was incorrect in killing the smart home central operating system project because it's been 20 years and we still don't have smart homes and they're still sort of a joke?
Well, one of the problems with smart homes in the real world is that a lot of the companies that make smart homes either fold under very quickly or get bought out by somebody else, and then you have incompatible software, and then pretty much your home is bricked.
Right.
So because of the way...
And also, frankly, do I really need to be able to, like, control my blinds by, like, remote control?
Yes, you do.
Like, who cares?
White people.
I guess yuppies care. But so I think that in that sense, it's a very interesting episode. I mean, in terms of how it's actually constructed and what it says about the characters, I don't, it's a little cheesy.
You get the sense that even Scully and Mulder are thinking, well, there's no way that this technology really exists in 1993. Scully even says we're decades from that, and she is correct,
Right.
But I think even both of them are just... See, in a way, it's not that different from the Jersey Devil. Yes, there is a 0.00001% chance that their theory is right, that this is some kind of missing link species that is still in existence. There's a 0.00001% chance that Wilczek has figured out how to make a true AI, set sequence. That, however infinitesimal the chances are, that is still what it looks like is happening, and they're dealing with it.
Well, yeah, because I mean that certainly the chances that any of their Mulder's theories are true are very small, but of course they at least so far they always have been.
Yeah,
and that's never really in question. I mean, the X-Files is not a show that is questioning the central premise.
Yes.
I mean, certainly we see Scully challenging Mulder in these 2 episodes. But, and especially in Ice, I think it takes on a very different flavor, but we'll talk about that when we talk about Ice. But I think that, it definitely is never in question that Mulder is right, quote unquote, or his worldview is right.
Because I don't think it will be impossible for them to be at least one episode in this series where all the evidence looks like it's going to be an alien, but it turns out it's just a human killer. I think that is a twist that I'm sure the series will do at some point. And I mean, which doesn't, negate the fact that this is a world where these kind of monsters or supernatural, whatever you want to call it, does exist.
Sure, absolutely. But I think that to your point in the beginning of this episode, where you said that the X-Files, these 2 episodes are very tonally different.
Yeah.
We have had a few different tonally different episodes so far. Is that yes, that's very true, and that's something that the X-Files was famous for.
Yeah.
In changing up very quickly, and that's something that you can do with this sort of pseudo anthology type of show. But the other part of that is that this really has nothing to do with the paranormal or the supernatural. I mean, this could have been done on an episode of Law and Order.
No, this is a full-on... Yes, this is a full-on science fiction episode in some ways, but science fiction in a very... This is much harder science fiction, let's put it that way. Because theoretically, AI can exist when we get to a certain amount of processing power, when we figure out how to have a computer learn in a particular way. Again, we're assuming that Wilczek is just that brilliant of a programmer that he does manage to stumble upon the secret. That's the fictional part. But that said, it is we can deal with, yes, it's realistically plausible that at some point somebody is going to invent a system which wishes to protect itself.
Yeah.
That's a lot harder science fiction than there are aliens, which,
Right. Now, of course, I mean, I think that if this had been an episode of Law and Order or something like that, it would have been revealed that Brad or someone else was actually the killer, because they're not doing science fiction. That's the X-Files difference here, is that the central operating system is actually the murderer.
Yeah, your Law and Order would have made the building super be the killer who kills the guy in order to start this investigation to eventually put suspicion on the computer to, gateway it, and
which. I'm glad you brought that character up, because I think the show is doing something very interesting with different strains or different departments in the government, and I'm wondering if you have noticed it.
Well, and in the next episode, I think a little bit too, but so far, the left hand really doesn't know what the right hand is doing in this government. There are all these departments in last week's episode, what was that one called with the ghost?
Shadows?
Yeah, in Shadows, for example, now they're working on some kind of anti-terrorist, unit, but we don't really know who they are exactly. They could be, and for a while,
Section 31.
For a while in that episode, you almost think that maybe they're a rival ghost. They're the branch of the FBI that specifically deals with ghosts. That could exist in this. You have all of these different groups, both in the FBI.
Is that what G-Man stands for? Ghost Man.
Ghost Man. No, it actually stands for government.
Oh,
yeah,
I get it.
Yeah. Now, I don't know to what if that is ever going to settle down. I mean, you could have all these shadow departments within the government, as many as you want.
Sure.
You could put it in a different one every episode, and it could be shadow governments all the way down. But
That might get a little tiring.
exactly, I don't know if they eventually coalesce into 2 or 3 major or what.
They do to some degree.
I'm sure there's some that will have more of a role in the plot. For example, we may never see that terrorist unit again, for example. But whoever's dealing with the airfield in episode 2.
Yeah. Well, what I think is interesting about the way that the show is sort of seeding that is that obviously they don't know what the hell's going on with the building supervisor. We don't know who he works for. He obviously works for the government. But Mulder and Scully have no idea what's going on. And then in ICE, the civilians, quote unquote, are openly questioning Mulder and Scully's loyalties or what they know, because they think, well, they work for the government, and so anybody that works for the government knows everything the government is doing. And the show is working on these different levels of knowledge and different levels of naivete, which I find fascinating.
Well, that's actually making me realize, because in the case of ICE, they assume that Mulder and Scully know everything and that they're, not telling them something about this case. And certainly that's a bit of a wedge that paranoia can be driven in, but they know nothing. So yes, maybe these other government groups really don't know anything. Deep Throat might only know like a couple scraps of information. He's sympathetic, but I mean, we are dealing with otherworldly things that are difficult to explain, are inexplicable, are paranormal. So it almost gives the sense of this government as this very, it has to do all this because it just doesn't know what the fuck it's dealing with almost.
It doesn't know what it's dealing with. And I think also that it is using every single possible avenue to gain an advantage. I mean, the government already has adopted alien technology into something, as we've seen. Now we find out that the government is very interested in adopting this AI program for some sort of reason, as Deep Throat says. And, even to the point where, they arrest Brad Wilczek because he confesses to the murders, because he doesn't want to have the government, be given the secrets of the AI. And he has this nice speech about Oppenheimer and the nuclear bomb. But, when Mulder goes to his house and he's already been taken, the seed is there for the later betrayal by the building supervisor, because the people that are guarding and have taken over the investigation, obviously once you see what happens at the end of the episode, you already know that something else is going on.
Yeah. I liked that I'm starting to see one of the major themes is the cost of technology, right? Like, this was a big point in the second episode where he says, they're developing all these technologies, but, people are dying or going, crazy from this, or dealing with some kind of, PTSD from just that there is a human cost to researching this technology. And technology is also only as good as its users. Wilczek in the monologue where he's talking about, they're either neat or scruffy. I'm scruffy. This is just a puzzle. Wilczek is just creates an AI because he can, because it's one of the hardest problems in computing, but
he doesn't really think about the consequences.
Exactly, until it's too late. And Wilczek would view it as a friend, as somebody who's going to help with that, as an interesting cerebral challenge.
Well, I think that, I want to pick up on something you said there, which is that, technology is only good as its users. And I agree with you, but I also kind of disagree with you. I mean, we've both read You Are Not a Gadget by Jared Lanier, who's famous for VR stuff. And, one of his central points in that book is that, and I think obviously it has a lot of connections to this episode, is that technology is designed and built by human beings, and they have their own biases, they have their own points of view and their worldviews. And for example, this seems kind of quaint now. I think the book was written maybe 5 years ago, but that just shows you how fast things are moving. But he has this thing about Facebook is really built on the worldview of a college student, because what does it ask you when you create an account? It asks you where you were born. It asks you, what sex you're interested in having sex with. It interests you in what your favorite bands are. And so the way that you interact with other people on Facebook, maybe this has changed to some degree, but because nobody looks at anybody's profile anymore. But the way that it was built initially was around the worldview of a 20-year-old college student. And so, look at Twitter, for example, where it's got this horrible problem with trolling because of the way it's built. And there would be ways to fix this, but people are reacting and using Twitter in this way primarily because the people that built Twitter made it this way.
If it had been built by people who are more sensitive to issues of harassment, for example, who could predict that, for example, let's say somebody who has dealt with, being harassed on Twitter develops a new social media platform, they're going to build in anti-harassment protocols from day one as a way of, you're right. Technology, if you can believe that programming is an art, and art is going to reflect its creator.
Right. And I think in a strange way, the fact that the COS in this episode is an artificial intelligence kind of sidesteps that question a little bit. Now, I don't know if the question was maybe not as well formed in 1993.
Yeah.
Again, because this kind of computer technology was still a novelty to most people. The vast majority of Americans in 1993 did not own a personal computer, or if they did, it was not connected to the internet. Obviously, we're living in a very different, social and cultural milieu now. But it is the kind of thing where I look at it and I say, I don't know if the show realizes exactly to what degree it's giving everybody else an out by making it an artificial intelligence.
I guess part of it is that I feel like there are other works which ask these kinds of questions much better, number one, and I think the show makes a mistake of referencing a little bit 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Space Odyssey. A Space Oddity was the David Bowie song.
I'm also thinking about even games like System Shock, which deal with an AI which in an effort to protect itself ends up rebelling against its creators, things like that. There are more nuanced portrayals. The COS never is a character in this episode,
which is part of the problem with
it. In a way, I said on Squeeze, it's only as interesting as the villain. Wilczek is a very interesting character. The building manager, even, we only learn a little bit about him, but he's an interesting character. Even what we know about the guy who gets killed in the beginning is more interesting than who COS turns out to be. COS may have intelligence, but it doesn't have personality.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to question they wanted to leave it at the end. At the end, I do think they almost want to ask us if Mulder made the wrong decision. Did he kill something new? Did he, could this be, if COS had been released to the world, would it be able to be used for good reasons as opposed to a defense thing? It wants to ask these questions, but it hasn't really developed COS enough that I can feel any empathy for it.
Right. And I also wonder, why is the COS's go-to move murder?
Yeah.
Obviously, it is still something where the X-Files is a very new show. It's still trying to find its footing and its voice. And, it really was sold as, a mystery thriller show. I get that. This is the type of episode this kind of show would do. But, especially considering that the show does an AI story again in a few seasons, and it's a much better version of this. Now, of course, it's also written by William Gibson, so you have that to look forward to. But... And I'm not being sarcastic. It's pretty good.
No, I knew but had forgotten that he wrote an episode. And again, that will probably give us a nuanced portrayal of an AI, or at least a more thoughtful version of what that means. Again, this is another episode in which the main plot was constructed fine. I was able to suspend enough disbelief. Okay, great. But I was much more interested in the interpersonal drama. But that says a lot about... Again, where these characters are already, that I am fine with just the two of them sitting in a room and just kind of joking with each other for a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, certainly Mulder and Scully, I don't know that they really get developed any further in this episode, but they have already come together, I think, in a very good way. And even to the point where, again, they're really sticking with the idea of Scully being an equal partner in this, because she's the one who rescues Mulder, of course.
Well, Mulder's plot with his friend, I thought that was very interesting that they give that to the guy. I mean, to have my work has been plagiarized by a coworker, my work was stolen by a coworker is a plot that a lot of women usually get.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's Mulder who is dealing with that, again, the show is going out of its way, and yet it's also very subtle at the way that we have a different worldview. We aren't having it's a show that doesn't have traditional gender roles as part of its makeup, which I very much like about that.
Which is also funny that one of the reasons the show became so big and famous is because of this whole will they or won't they thing with Mulder and Scully.
Yeah.
Which I'm not like spoiling anything for you because you obviously knew that because you grew up in the 90s. But I think that's right. I mean, I had forgotten that character even existed, and I just watched this episode like 2 days ago.
Yeah.
So that says something about his efficacy as a character. But
I mean, he's only in there to be he does provide a kind of a counterpoint to Scully's old friend in Shadows, right?
Yeah.
So in Squeeze.
In Squeeze.
Yeah, which is, again, I didn't like the villain, but I really like that interpersonal stuff. So in Squeeze, he comes by looking to have Scully assist him because he figures, all right, she's kind of in the basement, a feather in her cap will be, and if I get a promotion, I'll be able to, bring her up. He's doing this in a way as a favor to her. He turns out to be an asshole, but whatever. This guy is somebody who fucked up majorly.
Yeah.
He lost he sent a piece of evidence to the dry cleaners or something like that.
And it's like,
and
the results of which are like horrifying.
Which let people get away with a hate crime. I mean, the fact that it's very specifically not just a murder, but a hate crime.
They chopped off the hands of a judge.
Yeah.
I mean, it's deliberately as gruesome as possible.
Yeah. And this is a guy he needs the feather in the cap for himself. He's going to Mulder, and it is interesting the respect which he's given to Mulder and the reputation that Mulder still has in certain corners. Yes, he may be spooky, he may be doing these weird things, but he is a brilliant investigator. And if there's anybody, which in a way Mulder's also positioned in the basement allows this guy to steal his work without kind of repercussions. He's both brilliant and somebody who they're not going to listen to. So free work for him.
Yeah, and also I think you kind of get a different shade of Mulder in that scene because he tells him that all you had to do was ask. I would have helped you, and I think that's really interesting because to me, so far what we've seen in the other FBI agents, in Scully's friend in Squeeze, and in this episode with Mulder's friend, are careerist scumbags who only want the fifth floor corner office. They don't actually really care about solving crimes or protecting people, or if they do, it's only a means to an end.
Yeah.
Whereas Mulder certainly, because he is in the basement, and now Scully is starting to get sucked into his worldview and his sort of orbit, is that they cared maybe, I don't want to say too much about it, but they're so not worried about their own careers to the point where they're actively maybe harming their careers now.
Well, they and the other FBI agents are kind of the difference between lawful good and lawful neutral, right?
Yeah.
In a way, like the FBI agents, we are going to assume, are following the letter of the law. All right, they're performing their investigations by the book, but they're only doing it because, they are on the side of the law. They don't actually care about doing good in the world. It's true.
Yeah.
And I mean, that kind of gives a different resonance to trust no one. I mean, Mulder and Scully really can't trust anybody but themselves. Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting. This is the first episode we've seen where Scully very gently tries to suggest to Mulder that he's being irrational.
Right.
Because, frankly, from
her...
Yeah.
Very, very gender flip sort of thing.
Yeah. She's certainly questioned, are we sure? Is this, valid? Could this work kind of a thing? But when he's talking about this AI, she is seeing him as your friend died and you were pissed off at him and, you're under a lot of stress and all of those kind of things. I mean, she's not saying he's being irrational just because, this idea is crazy. She knows him well enough to know that he may not be his normal self right now. Now, of course, he does turn out to be right, but again, that angle that she questions him on is different, and it is one that comes from a more genuine place. It comes from a place of caring. She's not thinking he's crazy because, he's saying weird stuff again.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think you're already starting to see that these two characters care about each other, not just on a professional level.
Yeah. Again, they're the two who, Scully is the one person who is willing to believe Mulder because he has enough evidence to prove it. She is willing to listen to reason, and he's starting to become the one person around her that she recognizes is actually trying to do this for the right reasons as opposed to for their own selfish reasons.
Yeah, I think so.
The two of them are recognizing each other as kind of the only two people around with any integrity.
Yeah, I mean, that's really why they work, is that they're sort of them against the world kind of thing. And they're going to rely on each other. They're not going to rely on anybody else. Mm-hmm. They're going to question and sort of look askance at anybody else because they don't know if they can trust them. I mean, it's not incidental that this entire show is built on conspiracy and secrets.
Yeah.
And that, for example, the character of Deep Throat is in this episode again. He doesn't have much to do. He doesn't have much to say except some vague things about, how the government has secret projects and plots and plans.
But it's more like, okay, this wasn't just a random thing in a poorly constructed second episode. No, he's an actual character. We're going to be seeing him and he's going to do something.
Which, interestingly enough, he was only supposed to be a one-off character.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the crew liked him so much that they brought him back.
I love when TV does that.
I like it too because it's just like it shows it as sort of an organic human thing.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, that person sparkled really well on screen and got along really well with our characters. Like, we're going to bring them back.
Yeah, they gave a nuance to the character we didn't write in, but hey.
Yeah. Well, maybe the last thing to talk about before we move on to Ice, which is something, is I want to talk a little bit about this Brad Wilczek's conception of neat and scruffy minds.
Okay.
Because on the one hand, it's very simplistic and it's very 1993. On the other hand, I kind of think that the neat tech minds have taken over technology.
Yes. No, you're right.
And that the scruffy people are gone or that they're working in the basement.
Yeah. No. This is a distinction and it's the... there is a lot of people will talk about the difference between the hacker and the business side of computing, right? And I've heard this basic argument with different terms a lot of times. But yeah, it seems that at least that's how really though any artistic movement starts, doesn't it? You have a bunch of people who just do this thing because that's what their heart tells them to do. And then you have a bunch of people who will say, hey, we can make money off of this and we're either going to market them or we're going to do our version of it. And
right.
I think at this point you're right. We are, just the layman's view, we do see more of the neat stuff. We see more of apps as a way to make money. And I mean, even in indie games, there is this sense that, and this is starting to go away, but there was the sense that, anybody can make an indie game and be famous, that's the real question with tech, right? Are we doing this just for the love of a puzzle because we have this challenge that we want to solve and it's going to be very interesting and maybe we'll get a good end result out of it. But, it is just the act of doing it is itself meaningful, or is the act, all right, we have a thing and people want this thing and what we're going to do is, get this thing to everybody else.
Right. And I think that also, what it comes down to really is that, the neat minds are capitalists.
Yeah.
And part of what makes capitalism so insidious is that it makes you just materially uncomfortable enough to continually be in a state that is both susceptible to pressure and susceptible to feeling like you can also be rich.
Well, I will just point out that Wilczek's house is immaculate. As much as his hair is terrible and he's wearing, grungy clothing and bare feet, the man has a fucking that house costs millions of dollars, and it's
he's got a red sports car.
He seems to live by himself in this entire house too. So we're not talking about a guy who we're not talking about scruffy. His home isn't cozy and papers everywhere. It's pin neat. He has a housekeeper in. So that said, he is certainly. Maybe he didn't, he doesn't do the stuff initially for the fruits of the labors, but he is enjoying them.
Yeah, I think so.
As is his right to.
All right, well, that's where we differ. Let's talk about ice, which is an episode that is extremely nostalgic and sad because remember when there was ice in the Arctic?
Oh, yeah. The part when it's melting was, again, very prescient.
It was.
So, yeah, last week was written when one of the writing staff saw 2001. This week they saw The Thing. And
yeah,
that said, I liked this episode a lot in terms of a, just straight up paranoid horror episode. The body horror stuff was very effective. The makeup or effects or whatever they did worked. Yeah, I liked this one.
Yeah, it's good. And it's also written by your fave people.
Ooh.
Glenn Morgan and James Wong, who also wrote Squeeze.
See, now, again, we don't necessarily understand everything about this parasite, but we get enough information, and frankly, everything seems consistent and makes sense. We understand, we have a vague motivation for, see, again, because
well, I don't want to keep relitigating Squeeze.
Yes, I know. I feel like we're doing that a lot today. Yeah, I'm doing that a lot today.
Oh no, it's fine. I mean, it's definitely one of the more singular and famous episodes of the show because it kind of set the tone for it. But I mean, Squeeze in terms of tone, I think is very indicative of where the X-Files is interested in going. I think that what you can see here, though, is that Morgan and Wong, if they kind of took a grab bag of things that didn't necessarily make sense in Squeeze as a actual scientific thing or even scientific sounding thing.
Yeah.
In Ice, they did a much better job of coming up with a creature that, to my scientific layman ears sounds plausible.
Yeah. Again, there is most likely, as I think Scully says at one point, it's not likely that something would survive in sub-zero temperatures for that many years. And then again, what is that? That little creature, the water bear, can basically do that. I mean, there are animals on the Earth that live in such extreme conditions that, again, we can postulate, and again, 0.0001% chance. Well, we got to go with it. This is a show where that the X-Files are where that tiny infinitesimal chance lives, and we're seeing it.
Now, of course, I think the real difference here is that Mulder immediately jumps to it came from space, which.
Well, the second the baseball headphones guy mentions an asteroid, Mulder's like, "What? Space? I love space."
He unbuttons his shirt to reveal, instead of the Superman symbol, the face of an alien. Yeah, I mean, I think obviously it's a little. I mean, I like this episode a lot. Yeah. I think it's certainly for atmosphere. It's amazing, and it is an episode that, for better or for worse, again, I think really did, set the show down a certain path. We haven't had an episode of the show yet, I don't think, that is this claustrophobic, this scary. I mean, I won't go so far as to say it's terrifying. Now, this is your first time watching it, so maybe you had a different reaction. I don't know.
I mean, there were parts... It was a show that I looked away during parts when they're removing the worm from Bear. Like, I covered my eyes. Like, that was very well done. The entirety, seeing these nodules, seeing the worm, knowing it's living inside them, going into the ear. I mean, this is all. Yes, these are all somewhat obvious body horror tricks, but they're done very well. Again, the makeup and the effects work was done very well. The scene at the end when the Felicity Huffman character is, freaking out and, they're trying, that was terrifying. I mean,
she's flailing around. And
these are actors who are fucking committing to their performance and it's again, I can see episodes where it's not going to work out right, where they're not going to get a good monster or good acting, or, it's going to be poorly directed. But for this, if they wanted to make a show that was going to, really make me a little scared for 45 minutes, good job, guys.
Yeah. I mean, to that point, I mean, this is kind of a side tangent, but I'm reading the 2-volume oral history of Star Trek that came out last year, and it's fantastic if you like Star Trek, and you probably do if you're listening to this.
If you don't, you can start with our coverage, starting from the original series, because I didn't like Star Trek before starting this.
And what's that website, Richard?
TrekAboutShow.com.
Well done.
Thank you.
This is something that I've always said, and Ron Moore, who wrote on Star Trek: The Next Generation and Star Trek: Deep Space Nine primarily, said that they were doing. He said at one point, we were doing 26 episodes a year, and I believe his exact quote after that was, which is frankly unbelievable. Because it was hard to make that much television. And, the X-Files never made quite that many episodes, but very close to it. This season's 24. I think next season is 25. I think the lowest they ever go is 20. So, you can kind of see, yes, they're going to have some clunkers in there. They already have had some clunkers. But
just as TNG and DS9 had, original series 2 had plenty of, you've got 200 episodes of television. Not everyone is going to be firing on all cylinders.
Exactly. And so, Ice is very well done as a thriller. Ice is very well done as a sort of a classic, slasher serial killer movie in a way. Because you're watching these characters get picked off one by one. You don't know what's going on. You don't know who's doing it.
Yeah.
As it turned out, it's, Felicity Huffman, which is sad.
But there is a possibility in this episode for a while that nobody may have been infected. I mean, I almost wondered if that was what direction they were going to go with it, because, it is possible. I mean, certainly Mulder and Scully's tension is just due to the stress and the, of this particular environment. They don't have an alien worm in them,
I think that's certainly true. And I think it really does also help the show that, for the first time, well, maybe not for the first time, because Shadows was sort of a disembodied thing as well. But this is different because that was more of a paranormal thing. This is more of a science fiction thing again. We're going back into the realm of possible extraterrestrial life, or at least life that is so different from what we know exists that it might as well be extraterrestrial.
Again, there are elements of actual animals in this. Some parasites do work this way. Especially in the insect kingdom, aren't there like a grub that goes into crickets and controls their mind or something like that? Like we'll say that there are fucked up critters like this in the real world. Nothing that I know works on humans this way, but it's in the realm of possibility.
And it's also very different from what we've seen before. I mean, this is a very small scale thing. This is something in the natural world. This isn't really evil, right? I mean, that's something that I think is interesting and sort of, very important to pick up on as well, that there's no indication that, I mean, no one says that this thing is evil. No one says that it's, whatever it is. It's just, it's doing what it's naturally supposed to do. And if it's terrifying, if it got out into the real world, well, so is the flu.
Yeah. No, it's very much treated like a disease. There's even a part which, as a gay man who knows about the history of HIV, seeing Scully says he's just infected, it's not his fault. I mean, that I think is the theme of the episode. Mulder and Scully are arguing over should this be completely eradicated, which is what Scully's on the side of. This is too dangerous to.
Also, I'm on her side.
Yeah. And Mulder, I think, ultimately gets there too. Like, he certainly does want to try at the end to study it, but at the end, I don't think he's crying that much that the site is apparently destroyed, or is it?
Yeah. Well, they don't really ever go down a road of saying it's not destroyed.
Yeah.
I was saying it's more like I think you're already starting to pick up on how the X-Files likes to end episodes.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Even if this may not be the only incidence of this parasite on the world, but anyway.
Well, they do. Yeah, they kind of intimate that, but yeah, I think that, I mean, one of the things that I want to talk about is kind of the development between Mulder and Scully in this episode, because it's very interesting to watch them at odds.
Yeah.
And this is really the first time that I think they're really at odds.
There is very little interpersonal conflict between Scully, Mulder, and other people, whatever, dude and lady, because yes, there's a little bit, they lock Mulder up, they're not sure, but most of the engine of the conflict comes in the tension between Scully and Mulder, because that, frankly, is scary enough. Seeing two people who have always worked as a unit together so far, who have very, much clicked, who are always on the same side, suddenly worrying that they're on the completely opposite side. Again, that's the... Having gone this far already, I can appreciate this isn't something that would have worked at episode 2.
No.
You know, we need to know how serious it is when Mulder and Scully are just screaming at each other because they disagree on a point. Normally, I mean, they disagree all the time, but they talk it out as a debate. You know, they're at the end of the day interested in, we need to chip away at this idea till we get to the meat of it. In this, their argument is just over, you know, they're arguing over the right way to proceed and yelling.
Well, right, because I think if this had been episode 2 or 3, this is what would have defined their relationship.
Yes.
And that would have been, obviously, the wrong way to go.
Yeah.
I don't want to see 10 seasons of these people yelling at each other.
No. And it does add to the paranoid feel of it. They're acting very out of character. Are they just stressed, as it turns out to be, or is one of them, you know, do either of them have this parasite in them?
But I think it also, I think that's true. But I also think it shows, you know, exactly how paranoid and how easy it is for people who are sleep deprived and hungry and isolated and frankly uncomfortable can really be driven to act in very erratic and angry ways. I mean, certainly it turns out that you know, at the end of the episode, it's revealed that Felicia Huffman's character is the one that is infected by the worm. But all of them were sort of acting like they were infected, and you can kind of see where that tension really comes from, because, you know, one of the things I think you're already starting to see about the X-Files is that, you know, in a lot of ways it's about how these kind of things hide in plain sight. I mean, you know, the Jersey Devil, for example, is just in the woods of New Jersey for all these years and comes into Atlantic City, you know, stuff like that. So in this episode, you're starting to see that really come to the fore, I think, more. And also, too, that there's this other part of it, which is, I don't know, it's like, why send these people up there? I mean, in a certain sense, you're almost, it's like if someone in the government said, you know what, let's design a horror movie.
Yeah, no, it's true. Especially because there is that almost throwaway line where they say, you know, everybody who was on the original team was evaluated and screened, and everybody was psychologically able to handle this. And from what we see of the episode, we assume that that's the case. You know, as great as Mulder and Scully are, they may not be of the, you know, I don't think that they're the kind of people who do well in isolation like this.
Right. And also, we see the end of the expedition in the very beginning. That's the cold open of the episode, you know, so we're like, what the fuck? Like, you know, it obviously makes sense as the episode goes on, but that's a very striking way to start the episode. And then also, too, that, you know, just in terms of how this episode is actually constructed on a plot level and sort of like moving things forward, you know, it's obviously a very good idea to have the first person be killed be the pilot, because then that really isolates them. Okay, the storm is starting up much earlier than they think. You know, a little bit of humor, but, you know, not too much.
But I initially thought this would be one of those. I mean, it reminded me of how, especially in the original series, Star Trek loves giving its time limits, and so you have a 3-day time limit to get there and get out of there, and that's immediately scuttled.
Right. I think, you know, television, you know, is moving along always. And the art form is moving along always, and so they kind of get away from those things when they don't work anymore.
I mean, I especially love the part where he's, you know, talking to the ladies like, you said we had 3 days. Well, welcome to Alaska. Like, sorry, you know, this isn't it's weather, not science.
What do you want us to do?
I get, you know, one of the smallest criticisms, and this does have to do with the fact that it only has 45 minutes in the movie version or the video game version. There would be a lot more done with the original crew. We only see the two for that moment. The only, you know, we see Scully in the room and she has the pictures of the guy's family and that great bosom buddies poster. Well, I
mean, to a certain degree, it's shortcutted because showing that kind of stuff, who's going to do this kind of work? It's going to be single young men, for the most part. Yeah,
again, it's not a huge. It's better that they don't really go into it rather than very, you know, quick things about it. But you can also see, again, the 2-hour version of the story where they're slowly reading diaries and they're, you know, seeing videos and footage of that. But, you know, that said, the tension moved very fast in this episode, and it gave a very relentless feeling.
Oh, it does. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't let up. I think that part of the reason for the other character, because you could see a version of this episode that was just Mulder and Scully up there. And, there's no, I guess the pilot too, but the pilot could leave and then come back. I mean, there's ways around that, right? This didn't really happen. Like they're writing a television show. But, you could see a version of the episode like that. But I think one of the reasons for the other characters being there, obviously, number one, is to have other people to murder. Yeah. Because that really raises the tension and the stakes. But also to, in a sense, ground Mulder and Scully's relationship, kind of define it as opposed to as sort of against something, right?
Yeah.
And then also to really, I think, in a way, make the resolution of the episode out to be more ambiguous than it perhaps otherwise would have been, because as I said earlier, one of the things about Ghost in the Machine is that we've got this government agent that Mulder and Scully don't know what's going on with. And in this episode, the civilians think that everybody in the government just knows everything that everybody else is doing, no matter what agency or department they work for. And that's obviously not correct. And that's part of the tension of the episode, is that people, the two scientist people, the really asshole guy, which is, he never infected and he's just like a horrible person, and I never liked him.
He starts out suspicious and paranoid,
right? And the Felicia. I don't know why
Felicity.
I don't know why I keep wanting to call her Felicity,
because that's her name.
Is it?
Yes.
I thought it was Felicia.
No.
Oh God.
It's Felicity, like Felicity.
Well, I'm getting old. Felicity Huffman's character are
she's the only actress we know.
I know. I know Gillian Anderson.
Really, personally? Is she listening to this podcast?
She might be. Fun fact, I did see her once in person. I used to work for a radio station, and she was there.
Is she wonderful?
And I very casually walked past the booth with a paper in my hand, like, I need to deliver this paper to someone. I'm certainly not here just to stare at Gillian Anderson.
So we should tweet her the pilot episode when you do it, like, hello, lady, here's a show.
Yeah. Well, we can try that. That obviously it's to sort of like create these little enclaves or these little cliques within the group. And I think it's just ironic that the two characters that we, the Felicity Huffman character and then the other scientist, are obviously forming up a little team, and she's the one who ends up being infected. Yeah. And then also that, Mulder and Scully don't know as much as they think they know. And so there's layers upon layers here.
Yeah. There's that moment at the end when, he tells Mulder that it's been destroyed, and Mulder's surprised, and he's like, well, wasn't it your people who destroyed it? And I think that's when finally he begins to realize, like, okay, this guy really, the left hand really doesn't know what the right hand is doing. But.
Yeah. And also that Mulder, I think, kind of, is like, what a jackass. Like, he doesn't know what the hell's going on, I mean, the other thing to talk about is, again, this is a small thing, but I like to point it out when I notice it happening, is that once again, Scully is just a person who's doing a good job, because she's the one. I like the fact that Bear runs away from her specifically, and it's never a question that she just goes after him. She's the one that tackles him, and
he clocks Mulder with the jar, and then she tackles him. Yeah. One of the things,
like in a lesser version of this show,
yeah,
he would have clocked Scully, and then Mulder would have gone chasing him.
I mean, even the part when she gets locked in the room and, you know, it doesn't work, but she grabs this gigantic fucking drill, which, you know, has to weigh like 40, 50 pounds. She's just wailing at the one of the things I did not know, you know, of course, again, growing up in the 90s, you saw Mulder and Scully everywhere. I didn't realize she was such a badass.
Yeah. Yeah, she is. She's a badass.
I think a little more of a badass than he is.
Mulder is, yeah, I think that's
He'll
right.
He'll have his moments, and he has had his moments.
In a weird way, Mulder in a weird way, Mulder is more intellectual than Scully. Yeah. I mean, Scully is certainly obviously very, very intelligent. Yeah. She is a doctor. She, you know, but she's obviously a scientist. She has that kind of mind, but she's also willing to get her hands dirty, I think, in a way.
She's a doctor.
Which is true. Which I think is in a way that Mulder is not, or at least so far we haven't seen him want to do that.
Mulder is more of the theoretical and the research guy, and she is more of the practical and the, you know, she's more practical science.
Right. I mean, she's doing the autopsies and
Yeah.
she's, doing the research, and she's not afraid to get her hands dirty. She's not afraid to be dealing with this worm. She's not afraid to be doing any of this stuff. And I like the fact that, again, the show this is something that I really, hadn't really picked up on before, but watching it now with a critical eye, it's like, yeah, the show was really making Scully out to be, if not a feminist icon, then just an equal and integral part of the show, and it's doing a very good job of subverting a lot of those tropes.
But again, and it's not just isolated to Scully, because again, this is a show which is aware of gender roles. Stuff like Conduit made that very clear.
Sure.
But again, Felicity Huffman isn't treated like a woman in this episode. In that, as weird as that is to say, but she's treated as a scientist.
Well, I guess that's what it really comes down to, is that, still to this day, I think in a lot of media, television shows and movies and things like that, women are treated like women and men are treated like men. And I think what you're seeing so far in the X-Files is that that's certainly gender is there, and it's something that exists, but it's not a fait accompli in this show, and it's not the be all and end all of how these characters are relating to each other. First and foremost, they're relating to each other as professionals.
This is a show which, like the episode last week, needs to have a random, pathologist in a role, and so they cast a black woman.
Right.
That's not that means something.
Yeah, I think so.
This is gone with the same. Again, Star Trek. We'll talk about Star Trek a lot if you're just tuning in, but Star Trek tried to do, okay, we're going to have Nichelle Nichols on the bridge and stuff like that. This is in a way the heir to that, I'd say. I don't know if it was a direct, response to that. Obviously, I think it's, I'd like to think that there was some social change in between, and I haven't really looked at too many other shows with this kind of an eye towards who are they casting as extras. But now that I'm noticing it in this show, it's not and I do feel like with the amount of criticism that I read about shows now, the way that TV and Hollywood will cast women and minorities and stuff, and all of the controversies around that, I guess I do know that, again, casting that character as, having two anti-terrorist agents be, a man and a woman, both of color, is not an incidental, that didn't just happen.
Yeah.
Somebody decided we want to go deliberately for a colorblind casting.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, I think that I've never really looked at the X-Files with that kind of eye, but I think that it might be overstating it just a bit.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure I'm making...
I mean, also it was being filmed in Vancouver, and Vancouver,
it's true.
At least then was like famously super white. Not so much anymore because of all the Chinese immigrants that came into Vancouver over the past 20 years. But yeah, I think that there is something to that. Well, I think that's it about Ice. Good episode.
The ice is melted and we're done.
Not exactly the meatiest episode, but I think it's...
Oh, it had some meat in it. Very scary meat.
Oh, and the dog. You mentioned the dog. And he's rescued at the end. Everything's fine.
And then he becomes Shelley's dog. Scully's dog?
No. But there might be another dog in Scully's future. All right, well, if you have any thoughts on either of the episodes of The X-Files we just discussed, please leave a comment on the post for this episode of the podcast at tuninginshow.com. You can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/truckaboutshow, where you can give us some financial support if you enjoy our podcasts, including our other podcast, Trek About. Just 2 days ago this week, we released our episode on the Star Trek Voyager episodes Parallax and Time and Again. So check that out if you would like. Social media, we're on it. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Tuning In Show is our username in all those places. And as always, please leave us an iTunes review for tuning in. Next week, we're going to be talking about the episodes. A little bit of a rough week. Space, and which is not very good.
But Mulder loves space.
And Fallen Angel.
Mac, why do you...